Good afternoon. Here we go. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're excited to welcome you to this week's History is Lunch program. I'm Drew Gardner with the two Mississippi Museums, and we're glad to have you here in our home, the Craig H. Neilsen Auditorium, and the Museum of Mississippi History and the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. Also want to welcome everybody that's watching both on Facebook and YouTube Live. We're glad to have you guys with us. So you know that our programs are also available on both of those platforms to check out or to share with anybody that wasn't able to be with us in the room today. At this time, please go ahead and take a moment to go ahead and put your cell phone on silence or do not disturb for us. If you are in and around Natchez this weekend, we want to invite you to consider joining us for a free Indigenous cooking demonstration with Rebecca Scott, a descendant of the Natchez, Cherokee, and Creek ancestry, and David Cummingdeer, a descendant of the Cherokee ancestry, this Saturday, July 25th, from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. at the Grand Village of the Natchez Indians. Scott is going to be giving a cooking demonstration on the Three Sisters stew and cornbread. And Cummingdeer is going to demonstrate how to make a corn pounder, which is a traditional wooden handle tool similar to what we would consider a mortar and pestle, used to crush dried corn into cornmeal or to flour. And so if you're in and around that area in Southwest Mississippi, we'd love to have you join us for that program down in Natchez. But today we are delighted to welcome Susannah Ural and her presentation, Abraham Lincoln and America250. Dr. Ural is the Frank and Virginia Williams Chair of Abraham Lincoln and Civil War Studies at Mississippi State University and a leading scholar of 19th century American military history. Her work focuses on the experiences of soldiers and civilians during the Civil War and Reconstruction, explored through numerous publications on topics ranging from Union and Confederate troops to marginalized groups in wartime. So please give a warm welcome to Susannah Ural.
Hello, everybody. All right, y'all can hear me? It's always dangerous when they give me a mic. Usually my students ask me not to. I didn't quite get that wallflower message. It is such a pleasure to be back here and seeing so many old friends and new friends and just being part of History is Lunch again. I love your program, Drew. I mean, I've watched all the time. Even when I'm not here, I'm watching. The focus today is on Abraham Lincoln and America250. And what I want to do is take you through this collection that we have at Mississippi State of Lincolniana. If you've never heard of the word Lincolniana, you're not quite sure what it means. All it means is anything to do with Abraham Lincoln. It's a nice, simple definition for it. And what we do is through the exhibits, through artifacts, through manuscripts, through this incredible collection, we're telling this story of America and American democracy through the life of Abraham Lincoln. How many of y'all have been there before? You might not have. Okay, yeah, I'm seeing a couple. If you go to Mississippi State, the Ulysses S. Grant Presidential Library is on the 4th floor of the Mitchell Memorial Library. We're right next to it. We're right in there with it. And you can find us there. The number one question we always get asked is, how did Grant and Lincoln get to Mississippi? You know, the second time. Lincoln never quite, but Grant is back. How it worked were the Grant Papers, the Ulysses S. Grant Papers, and the Ulysses S. Grant Association was looking for a new home in the early 2000s, around 2009. And John Marslick, a lot of you know Dr. John Marslick, a great historian who was at Mississippi State for years, still is active in Starkville, was part of that association to help to bring that collection there. The president of the Grant Association was a guy by the name of Frank J. Williams, a retired lawyer, retired Chief Justice of the Rhode Island Supreme Court, who had been collecting anything and everything to do with Abraham Lincoln since 5th grade, he and his wife together. They had at the time the largest privately held collection of Lincolniana in the country. They were so impressed with how Mississippi State handled bringing the Grant Papers to Mississippi State University, and they were looking for a home for their collection, that they decided to bring it here. And so it's a unique opportunity for a research university, a research library, to be able to tell this full story of the Civil War and Reconstruction. You know, through these Grant Papers, everything Grant ever wrote or was written to Grant, you can read there. this vast collection of Lincolniana. We have over 40,000 items, original manuscripts from Lincoln, cabinet members, family members. We have artifacts from the time period, but really about 2/3 of our collection of Lincolniana is how people have remembered Lincoln. And if you ever kind of dabbled in history of memory, you know, the fun thing about it is it often tells you more about the person doing the remembering than sometimes the actual individual themselves. And how we choose to remember Lincoln tells us a lot about ourselves. And as you can see here, there's Frank and Virginia Williams when they donated the collection. Books, pamphlets, we have everything you can possibly want to research. And it's all here in Mississippi, which, as you will remember, during the Civil War was one of the most powerful states in the Union. And so it's this way to explore this full story of the Civil War. And today, what I want to talk to you about is a couple of the items we have in the collection and how it helps us reflect upon the nation's founding, kind of the founding kind of tenets, if you will, of American democracy, how Lincoln thought about those and spoke about those during his times. One of the artifacts that we actually just added to the collection last summer is a leaf, meaning a double-sided sheet of Lincoln's cipher book. To put that in 21st century terms, just think about it as like a classroom workbook. During the time period, these weren't published and distributed to students. Students had to get their own paper. They would kind of sew those sheets together, and they would often copy down whatever the teacher wanted the class to be studying during this time period. Lincoln only attended school for about a total of 1 year. It was about 4 3-month sessions. He often didn't have lovely things to say about his teachers. He was like, whoever remotely knew anything, they would make teacher. And it's one of the reasons, one of the first pieces of legislation that he helps pass when he joins the Illinois state legislature is a qualifying examination. He's like, I want teachers to be well prepared. I want us to put the money into preparing teachers. And I want them to all be those teachers that we remember that often got a lot of us interested in history and are the reasons why, I don't know about you, but part of the reason why I'm here. So this cipher book, you can see, you're not going to be able to see it from where you are probably, but you can see he's doing mathematical equations. He's doing cursive handwriting. They basically would study all the fundamentals of reading, writing, and arithmetic. Probably one of my favorite things about this is, like any grade school student, he's scribbling on the bottom, and there's this little ditty that he chose to write, Abraham Lincoln is my name, and with my pen I wrote the same. I wrote in both haste and speed and left it here for fools to read. And so, you know, it's just, of course he would say that. When we all kind of randomly write out in our little notebooks, it is one of the most rare items in the collection. There's about 22 leafs that we know of to the original notebook, if you will, the cipher book. One's at the Library of Congress, one is at Harvard, one is at Yale. They're kind of scattered, if you will, and we managed to get one at Mississippi State University. One of the other items I want to talk about a little bit here today is something we don't often associate. We kind of connect Abraham Lincoln to the Civil War, but we forget that he actually served in a war himself. This was the Black Hawk War, which was fought in the summer of 1832. He served in a volunteer militia company, and he's elected captain of his company. He'd only been living in New Salem, New Salem, Illinois for a year. And so he's surprised that the men of his community would back him to be their company commander. And he says years later in 1860 that it was one of the great honors of his life. What you can see here on their certificate is this is a discharge paper that Captain Lincoln is signing. You can see he's discharging George Warburton, who was a private, served honorably, and it's signed A. Lincoln, Captain, right there at the bottom right-hand corner. We often use this piece to talk about citizenship. Who serves, who is asked to serve, what are the expectations of service. If you know anything about Lincoln and the Black Hawk War, he was not, how do I want to say this? He was very popular with his men. I'm not sure if that would have continued when they went into combat. He would have been brave, he would have been honorable, but he wasn't an instinctive commander. He would get in trouble with his higher-ups because his men were just basically just about uncontrollable. And Lincoln would take the blame for things. Lincoln would also make mistakes, he would discharge his pistol too close to camp, got arrested for that. He had to march around with a wooden sword for 2 days because his men went ahead and got drunk and were late for everything the following day, and he had to take responsibility for that. But they absolutely loved him because he wasn't formal. He wasn't all about military discipline. And he was probably one of the few men who could have handled that company and kind of kept it together. The other takeaway that I want you to remember is we're about to get into kind of this conversation. I want to lead you through thinking about America 250 and the founding principles. Lincoln was proud of his military service, not because of heroics. He often poked fun. He would say, the most blood we spilled was from mosquitoes. We were basically hungry. It's the typical thing you can always find home in soldiers and Marines and sailors' letters, right? I'm hungry. It won't stop raining. My feet are wet. Just those constants were absolutely there. But what he learned was how to lead men through those situations. And the pride he took was not in heroics necessarily, but in serving his community. He would talk about the fact that it mattered to him that his community knew he was with them and that he was dedicated to serving them. And it's part of this message of citizenship and who's going to be part of that citizenry. The other piece that we recently added to the collection is this folk art doll. We think it was kind of presented as a piece coming from the election of 1864, because if you lift that mask, the fabric underneath is not a basic white muslin. It's almost like this black. It's not silk, but it's more of a satiny kind of feel to it. And one theory is that this was an effigy doll. The enemy, kind of opponents of Lincoln, would have burned this in effigy when he was running for re-election in 1864. The problem, some folks at the Smithsonian pointed this out at the Library of Congress, is number one, effigy dolls were usually human size, and number two, very crudely made. You're not going to put a lot of time into something you're about to burn. There would just kind of be the sign around its neck that would have said A. Lincoln, and they would have set it on fire. This is really intricate. And so this is why a lot of people theorize that it might have been from his re-election campaign in 1864, when Lincoln was accused of being a black Republican by his political opponents. He was too invested in civil rights, he was too invested in emancipation, and therefore this black cloth is symbolizing this. Then there's also the possibility that it's just a doll, and there were presidents' masks, and you could change them out. It could just be that, right? We always want it to be something more and something deep and meaningful. It's kind of like when you read letters from the 19th century, and you're like, stop talking about the weather and tell me what you think. Oh, before I forget, I want you to notice this. We often point this out when groups come through the museum, is how positive Lincoln was that he was not going to win re-election in 1864. Like the country, remember, the first time he was elected, 7 states left, followed by 4 more. It's not exactly encouraging. He insists on having his re-election run just like any other campaign, despite the fact that the nation is involved in the midst of a massive civil war. And it's an increasingly unpopular civil war in the North. And as late as August of 1864, Lincoln is confiding. He says, "You think I don't know I am going to be beaten, but I do. And unless some great change takes place, badly beaten." And of course, what helps change and turn the tide as Sherman takes Atlanta, and a number of other things happen that help Lincoln win. But it's this reminder of how democracy functions, including in times when it's not functioning well, when it's under a tremendous amount of threat. All right, so what I want to focus on now, I've kind of introduced you to the collection, and hopefully I've enticed you to make a trip to Starkville. But what I want to talk about now is something Lincoln called our ancient faith, which is Americans' obsession, reverence. It's just the way this adoration that we have for our past, and in particular how that past has been shaped by the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. The Constitution and the Declaration just guided Lincoln throughout his life. You can't take the founding of the nation out of his principles as a politician and as a leader. He would often talk about the fact that these three tenets that guide us, right? And that you have the Declaration of Independence, which is, this is where we're inspired to do great things. This concept of unalienable rights, as John Adams would insist, not inalienable rights, of fundamental freedoms granted by God. He would talk about the Constitution as our guidebook. All right, these are the laws, and you have to obey the law or democracy crumbles into mobocracy, is the phrase he would use when he was particularly frustrated with people taking the law into their own hands when they believed they were doing the right thing, But he's like, when you take the law into your own hands, it will be chaos. It's the law. And if you can change the law, but you have to abide by the law. And he said the way these two founding documents work for the citizenry and for those who want to be citizens are these three tenets, these three guides, if you will. Number one, he talked about virtue, and the founders talk about it too. If you've read Adams, Madison, if you've read any of the founders, they talk about for democracy to work, the citizenry must be virtuous. You must be willing to vote for things that might not be in your best interest, but are in the best interest of the nation. And then John Adams would go on to say, but that doesn't always work, right? We're not always as virtuous as we should be. And so then they would talk about the moral right, right? And understanding what is right for the nation and studying and guiding yourself through tumultuous times, difficult decisions for the nation in terms of what is just, what is fair, and what is true, what goes back to that Declaration of Independence and those ideals that are grounded, that guide us, if you will. Okay, the Constitution is, they would talk about as almost more mechanical. It's the mechanics of how it works. But the Declaration is what we have to strive to be. Always going back to that. And in the end is that third thing that Lincoln would come back to again and again and again is the law. The law guides us. You can change the law, but you have to follow the law or democracy won't work. And this is one of the reasons you'll see him. And one of the things you often get frustrated with him in history is you're like, oh my gosh, it's just wrong. Just stop abiding by this law that is just wrong. Take something like slavery. Lincoln was outspoken or freely spoke of the fact that he opposed slavery his whole life. He was raised in an anti-slavery home. His parents left Kentucky to move to a free state because they didn't want to be around slavery. He was fundamentally opposed to slavery. What he accepted, though, as the law was slavery where it existed. But what he fought against, and you see him out increasingly vocal about this starting in the 1850s, is the expansion of slavery, right? Because he's just like, look, the founders never meant for this thing to continue. He fundamentally believed the founders knew that the system would end. They had to accept it at the time to create the nation and wage a war for independence, but they planned on it ending. And what Lincoln said is, I'll accept that it exists where it is now, but you can't have it extending. You can't have it going throughout the whole country, or we're abandoning the legacy of the founders. And this is why he and this new Republican Party that gets formed becomes so focused on containing slavery. All right. Now, of course, there's going to be disagreements in terms of, well, wait a minute, there's a significant portion of the country that fundamentally does not believe the founders argued that. Hence the rub, as Lincoln would say. I want to talk to you about two documents in particular. Forgive me, I'm going to look at my watch, otherwise I'll go on forever, y'all. I want to talk about two documents in particular. I want to zoom in on these that really capture Lincoln's thinking as we think about America 250 this year. And by the way, keep thinking about it. I don't want America 250 to end in 2026. There's all the anniversaries from 1777 and 1778. There's a lot of history for us to reflect on and learn from. The Gettysburg Address is probably the most famous address in U.S. history. Lincoln delivers the Gettysburg Address on November 19th, 1863. He's been invited to the town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. You can see him there circled in this rare photograph of Lincoln on the day he gave his speech. He's there to help consecrate a cemetery and to help convince a nation, Lincoln knows, to convince a nation that the war must go on, that there is purpose to this. Gettysburg was fought kind of almost simultaneously with the Vicksburg campaign, while Federals take control of Vicksburg, Mississippi on July 4th, 1863. It's the day after the battle ended at Gettysburg in Pennsylvania. At Gettysburg, there's close to 50,000 casualties. It's the largest battle ever fought in the Western Hemisphere. It's the largest battle of the American Civil War. And Lincoln goes there in November to give meaning to this, which is a tall task. I mean, this is the end of another campaign season. The Union has not been saved. Emancipation is still a fairly new idea in the nation. And remember, the Emancipation Proclamation is only an executive order. Whoever comes in next can reverse it. And Lincoln is trying to convince the nation when he goes to Gettysburg about why this fight must continue. And I want to just read portions of it here and let us kind of dissect it a little bit. First portion, it starts out, 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. And I don't know how many of you are writers in this room. I know one of you are. But when you write, you want every word has to count. This is why writers often talk about reading poetry, where there's a limit on your words, right? You have a limited amount of space here. Every word has to count. He uses 272 words to drive home this point. 77 years ago, he's going back, right? 87 years, he's going back to 1776. And he's saying that we created something entirely new. This idea that this nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to this principle, this proposition, that all men are created equal. And he continues, now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as the final resting place for those who gave here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. And by the way, what they did here, that action, is the only word in his speech that he underlines. And he's reminding everyone here that the consecration portion of this, the sacrifice that they're all thinking about, that fight for those men, that's done. They have more than done their part. And Lincoln continues, it is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work, which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolved that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. 2 minutes. The previous speaker spoke for 2 hours, if you know that story. In 2 minutes, right? I always remind myself, I'm editing chapters right now. Cut, fluff, cut. I know you love it. You don't need it. But in 2 minutes, what Lincoln is saying is that we lost our way for a while there. But we need to get back to those founding principles. We need to get back to this idea of a nation conceived in liberty. And that is the work for us to do. It's not enough just to consecrate this ground and remember the sacrifice that others have made. More sacrifices must be made. The work still needs to be done. And so it really is in many ways this rallying cry, hearkening back to the founding and also thinking about where the nation needs to go. When you visit the library, when you visit the Williams collection of Lincolniana, you can take a look at this item. It's often on display in the gallery. This is one of the first published editions of the two speeches. Everett's very long speech that, bless his heart, nobody remembers. And Abraham Lincoln's brief but powerful one. It was published just months after the event and is a very, very rare item in the collection. All right, one more that I want to talk to you about before I open this up to Q&A. There's another item in the collection that helps us think about not just the responsibilities of citizenry, right, and what Lincoln talks about, like the work, every generation, the work is always needing to be done. We're needing to move forward. You can't just rest on your laurels and thank those who sacrificed before you. And one of the things you notice in Lincoln is how his thinking changes over the course of his lifetime of who can be a citizen, who can do this work, who can handle the responsibility of freedom. Because for democracy to work, again, this is what he's saying, it's work. You have to understand, you need to learn, all right? This is like I told you, he passes legislation for teachers to have examinations, right, to be qualified to teach in the state of Illinois. He's also the president who signs into law land-grant universities. Again, the idea being that the state, the nation, should be paying in part for educating the citizenry so they can make good decisions. In the 1850s, Lincoln was still arguing slavery was wrong. He'll accept it where it exists, but we cannot let it extend any further. And slowly it's going to die out, which it needs to do. And that was always the founder's plan. This is what he's arguing in the 1850s. As early as the early 1860s, he is still questioning the idea if African Americans can be part of that citizenry, if they can handle that work, those responsibilities of citizenship. And two things change his mind when he's in the White House. One is he is the first American president to welcome Black visitors to the White House, and he talks with Black leaders about emancipation, but also a lot of them are just like, look, ending slavery is necessary and important, but what comes after that? Access to education. What about suffrage? What about the right to serve politically? What about jury service? What about all of the fundamentals that we associate with what we think of today as fundamental civil rights? And Lincoln starts to realize that, you know what, maybe I'm wrong on this. And what the other thing that happens is with the Emancipation Proclamation, he approves the idea of African American military service. Right? Before this, Black men were allowed to serve in laboring positions. With the Emancipation Proclamation, now they can serve on fortifications, which opens the door to serving in combat roles. Dramatically increases the number of men that the U.S. military can tap into for soldiers and sailors for recruiting. At the same time, it dramatically decreases the numbers that the Confederacy can tap into for laborers at home, laboring in camp, and these sorts of things. And there was a big question. There was a tremendous amount of prejudice about, can African-American men serve well as soldiers? Will they obey orders? Will they be so enraged by their enslavement that when it comes a chance to kill white Southerners, will they just keep killing? There were all sorts of questions floating around. And there's one of the first key battles that challenges those assumptions, those prejudices, is here in Mississippi at Milliken's Bend, right there, kind of Mississippi, Louisiana, which helps certainly whites there, but as word gets out of it, realize that these African-American soldiers serve very well. And maybe we might be wrong about some of this. Now, y'all come to these things all the time. History is not a light switch moment. It's not like, it's the summer of 1863, and we realize that prejudice against African Americans is wrong, right? This is the beginning of one of these moments where attitudes are starting to change. And what you're going to see over the course of the war, battle after battle, campaign after campaign, Lincoln starts to argue, well, wait a minute. If these men are willing to make the sacrifices to fight for the Union, why shouldn't they be part, meaning actually actionably part as citizens of the Union? And in April of 1865, just days before he's murdered by John Wilkes Booth, Lincoln gives an impromptu speech from the White House. He didn't give a lot of these. They didn't always go well. We always think, the Gettysburg Address, he wrote it on the train ride up to Gettysburg. No, he didn't. He'd been working on it for a long time. We tell ourselves that when we're running behind. Lincoln just winged it. It'll work. It rarely does, folks. Don't try it. I've tried it. Don't. He rarely gave these impromptu speeches, but this is an issue that he's been thinking about. In the spring of 1864, when Louisiana was kind of putting together a unionist government, A Unionist legislature. Lincoln wrote to the Unionist governor of Louisiana, a guy by the name of Hahn, saying, I think you should think about black male suffrage. And it's a baby step, y'all. This is classic Lincoln, very slow. He moves very slowly when he changes, but he rarely goes back. And he's focused on those who have served honorably in the military. He's arguing they have earned the right. This is a classic American argument. Goes back to like colonial militias. And he says, number two, the educated, the intelligent. Now, how you're going to measure that, he doesn't offer that guidance. But what you see is Lincoln's mind changing as early as the spring of 1864. But he says it quietly in a letter to the Unionist governor of Louisiana. You ask him, and don't share this with people, don't publicize this. He's not ready to go public. In April of 1865, he delivers a speech from the White House, and he's ready to go public. And he makes the case for limited black male suffrage and black citizenship. And he said, if people are willing to pay the ultimate sacrifice for the nation, they're ready to be actionably part of that nation. It's a very popular message, as you would imagine, obviously with abolitionists, but with black Americans who've been making this argument for years and years and years. In the summer of 1864, so this would have been a year before what we traditionally celebrate as Juneteenth. In the summer of 1864, black New Orleanians in Louisiana celebrated their own Juneteenth. And what they were celebrating was the fact that that Unionist legislature in Louisiana had abolished slavery. I don't know how many of you remember this. When the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect, if you were enslaved in New Orleans, you were still enslaved. The Emancipation Proclamation only affected areas in Confederate-controlled territory. So there were pockets of Virginia, there's pockets of Louisiana, there's these pockets where slavery had continued. And so this decision by the Union legislature in 1864 dramatically changed the lives of thousands of people. And that's what New Orleans is celebrating that summer of 1864. They have all sorts of parades in June, 4th of July, there's more celebrations in August. And at the end of that summer, 12 African-American men, all of whom had previously been enslaved and later had now were printers, decided to put together some of the speeches that were delivered, descriptions of the events. And what you notice when you read through this pamphlet, it's called Emancipation Celebration. What you notice when you read through it, there's only about 5 copies, I think, in existence in the country, one of which we have. It's not just describing the celebrations. There's also everything you would think about as an old-time county fair. It's like, who's the best baker? Who's the best blacksmith? Who's the best doctor? Which midwife delivered the most babies? Who's the best teacher? What it is a reminder of this is a community of citizens. They are already doing the work of citizenry. And these 10 black printers put together this pamphlet. They bound it in that red leather volume here that you can see. And into that brass plate, it says, to His Excellency A. Lincoln, President, U.S., by the colored people, New Orleans, Louisiana. And the speeches contain these reminders of freedom is good, but it's going to have to come with suffrage. It's going to have to come with the right to have a seat in these political positions of power, from the very highest to the very lowest. Citizenship needs to come with freedom. They send it to Lincoln in December of 1864. We know he received it based on a letter sent back that is signed A. Lincoln. We don't know for sure if he actually held it, because he received thousands and thousands and thousands of gifts. And it might have been one of his secretaries who wrote the thank you note, which is very frustrating. But black New Orleanians get word of this in January of 1865, that their gift reached the White House, that their message of what freedom should look like has reached the White House. And this item managed to find its way back. Frank Williams and Virginia Williams picked it up at an auction, I think they said in New York, in the 1980s. And it is on display in the collection. And it's this wonderful reminder of Lincoln constantly going back to those founding principles to guide the nation and to guide himself through the Civil War. I want to invite you all, if you kind of use your phones and do that QR code, it'll take you to our landing page to learn more about the Williams collection of Lincolniana. If you're like, oh my heavens, if would you stop giving me QR codes? I don't do QR codes. Just Google it, or you can find me afterwards and I'll tell you how to find this. Thank you all. And I think, Drew, I have time for questions? Okay. Thank you all. Any questions? Drew's got the mic. All right, hold on. He's got to get over there so they can hear you. Hold that thought. You can look at your phones and I won't frown at you.
There we go.
Good afternoon, Dr. Ural.
Good afternoon.
The question I have, do you have anything in your collection of correspondence between President Lincoln and Mr. Frederick Douglass?
I'm thinking.
Or was that like after?
No, not original. No. We don't have any original letters between the two of them. What we would have are pamphlets, 19th century pamphlets. I don't know if you ever looked at 19th century pamphlets. It's like the social media of the middle class in the 19th century. Like it was very cheap to publish your thoughts. And so everybody's like, I have a profound thought on X, right? And as we all know from social media, sometimes it's better to delete these things. Sometimes it's not, though. Sometimes people have these amazing ideas. And so, no, we do not. Now, I know in the Grant Library, for some people, this is going to sound gruesome. This is very common in the 19th century. They have a lock of Frederick Douglass's hair in the Grant Library. And if you know anything about the 19th century, they were all about the hair, which if you've ever seen some of this, they'll braid it, they'll work it into pins and brooches. This is a way of kind of holding on and to revering a person. When we take undergrads through, sometimes they're just horrified. They see it as objectifying. And I'm like, that's not how they meant it. So that I can't, and we have tons of stuff on Douglass, but not directly between Lincoln and Douglass. I wish. That'd be great.
Thank you.
Sir.
Very good presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I was just wondering, because concerning the Emancipation Proclamation that President Lincoln, through his executive order, ordered, but it was directed to the states that were in rebellion, the slaves of the Confederacy. And they had seceded from the Union. So we have two separate countries. We have the one with President Lincoln as president, and the other one with a new president, a different president, different flag, different constitution, and everything. So Lincoln directing this Emancipation Proclamation to the Confederacy. What was his purpose? Because he's directing this Emancipation Proclamation to a separate country that he had no control over.
Right. It's a good question. So, number one, he would argue it was not a separate country. It was never a separate country. So, hold on one second. Let me make sure they can hear you on the recording. Go ahead. What were you saying? Can you say it again?
I was saying that they did secede.
They did.
They did secede, meaning they separated themselves as a separate country because they were in favor of slavery.
Right. But
so
what
they were a separate country. So, and he's directing this executive order to emancipate the slaves who were in a separate country. Why was that? What purpose would that serve?
Right. So number one, the purpose it serves is that those states are in rebellion. Lincoln will go out of his way to say they are not a separate country ever. They are referred to as those people. He refers to them in all sorts of ways, but never as a separate country. Number two, the idea is to not only allow U.S. forces and U.S. officials to be able to recruit from free blacks living in the North, and later to recruit from enslaved blacks living in the North that can win their freedom by serving. But the idea is to draw men away that the Confederacy is using, whether by working on farms, as enslaved laborers, in military encampments, etc. So it's going to it's a military measure in many ways. It's going to sap Confederate strength while expanding federal strength. I guess the thing I would say, kind of that last point, on what is he thinking? What is he actually? Does he realize? He's basically passing a law in an area that he doesn't control. And your point there, a lot of abolitionists in the North absolutely agreed, right? They're just like, well, congratulations, Mr. Lincoln, you took a bold move by freeing the people in the area where they could least likely be freed. We can't reach them. What are we supposed to do? But what Lincoln argued is this is not politically radical enough to enrage the slave states that have stayed in the Union that he can't risk losing, but it's just enough, he's hoping, to inspire rebellion in the South and expand strength in the North. Hope that helps. Yes, ma'am.
I appreciate your approach to this. It's the first time I've heard a discussion from that angle. A couple of things. One is that some people kind of take pride in saying Lincoln didn't care anything about the slaves. He just made the order in the best interest of keeping the Union together.
Right.
And what was the last thing? Well, I'll stop there because my memory.
I get it. Now I'm going to answer the first part, and if you think of the second part, just put your hand back up. So the argument that Lincoln doesn't actually care about slavery, he's really just trying to save the Union. If that's the case, that doesn't explain why he fought so hard to get the 13th Amendment passed in Congress and then ratified in the states, right? And the reason Lincoln does this is because he knows the emancipation is an executive order. Like it's not going to last long, like just mathematically. Whoever comes in next who doesn't like it, it's gone. And now we're right back to the original problem. And that is one of the reasons he fought so hard, number one, for the 13th Amendment, which abolishes slavery. But number two, I would also argue, this is why he's willing to make a public speech about something like black male suffrage. And it's limited black male suffrage. It's not where we want Lincoln. Lincoln is often very slow to get to where we want him. But wow, when he gets there and when he's able to gauge, he's like, the public is ready to hear it now. He doesn't think they were in the spring of 1864. But in the spring of 1865, he's putting all his cards on the table. And it's not immensely popular in the spring of 1865 among white Northerners. But he's willing to start to force that issue and try to convince people, as Lincoln very powerfully could, that you need to think about this. And he makes that case. If these men are willing to sacrifice themselves for the nation, really? They shouldn't have the right to do the fundamental, and he this wonderful way of just laying out an argument like you heard in the Gettysburg Address. So that would be my report to that. I don't think it's right to see Lincoln as saving 3.5 to 4 million people from slavery, right? I think we're right in the field to argue that a lot of Black Americans, had to get themselves to Union lines to be free. They had to make a case for freedom wherever they were living in the North or the South. But I think we're wrong to reject the idea that Lincoln did believe in this, and that he played a fundamental role, as did Congress, in bringing about these changes as well. Thank you.
What are one of the largest blind spots in Lincoln's legacy that people miss or forget? And what happens to the country and his family after he's killed?
Oh, good question. Blind spot. I have a couple ideas, but I think one of them is fresh on my mind because I've just been editing that Black Hawk War chapter. And Lincoln often wrote about the importance of cheap land so that everyday Americans could own their own land, have benefit from their own free labor. This is one of the reasons Congress passes the Homestead Act, but Lincoln signs it into law, right? He's always thinking about this, and he always associates that if you can own your property, as we would think about it now, and own your own labor, that this is a fundamental portion of enjoying the freedoms, right, of democracy. But one of the things you'll notice with Lincoln was he doesn't think a lot about the fact, well, where is that land coming from? During the Black Hawk War, you don't see him thinking about the fact that the land that he's trying to hold on to, you know, Chief Black Hawk from the Sauk tribe is trying to reclaim lost land. And so, you know, if you want to think about a blind spot for Lincoln, it's that big picture wise, Native American rights, indigenous rights were just not in his mind. At the same time, he's fundamentally arguing for those rights for white Americans, and quite quickly after that for Black Americans. What was your other one? Oh, thank you. So his life after what is life like? Yeah, you're right, not his life after he dies. Life in the country after he dies, not good. I don't know that anybody could have successfully led the nation through Reconstruction. In all fairness to Andrew Johnson, who everybody loves to beat up on, and in fairness, he asks for a lot of it. But I don't even know if Lincoln, I mean, and I'm not alone in this, a lot of historians make the point, I don't know if Lincoln would have been as popular as he is today had he lived through the Reconstruction, because the radical Republicans who wanted to push faster on ending slavery, fundamental Black civil rights, were often out ahead of Lincoln, and he'd be like, okay, we're going to get too out there, we're getting out over our skis, and we're going to get so much pushback, we're not going to accomplish any of this. And so Lincoln probably, the argument is, would have adopted a fairly moderate approach to Reconstruction. Now, would he have maintained that moderate approach as you see atrocities that happen in the South during Reconstruction? I don't know. My hope is that he wouldn't. My instinct is that he wouldn't, but I don't know. And as far as what happens to his family, I mean, it's just one tragedy after another. I mean, Mary Todd Lincoln gets a very bad reputation. I often think of the fact that it'd be rough to be a highly educated, highly intelligent woman in the 19th century, right? Where if you express too many views, you're just one of those emotional women. In fairness to everybody else, I also have the funny feeling Mary Todd Lincoln wasn't a particularly pleasant person to be around. So, you know, there's both sides of that coin. But I mean, she is literally, by this point in their marriage, buried 2 of their children. She is holding her husband's hand when he is shot in the back of the head. You know, you come out of that untraumatized, and I mean, it's just one nightmare after the other. You know, their eldest son, Robert Todd Lincoln, has her briefly institutionalized because basically she's out of control. No, she was not insane, but he could not control her, and he had fears. There's arguments that are viable that Robert had a lot to blame for that too. So it's not a happy story. That happens to their story. And in some ways, Lincoln's story is not a particularly joyful one. It comes from a tremendous amount of tragedy. And he often talked about the fact of just kind of melancholy and sadness that gripped him for most of his life. But yeah, it's amazing what that family accomplishes, though.
There are a couple of accounts that in 1827 and in 1831 that Abraham Lincoln got a job on some boats coming down the Mississippi River. Did they make a stop in Vicksburg and Natchez? Maybe so. But they went on to New Orleans. And it was there that Abraham Lincoln witnessed a slave auction or two and became agitated about it to the extent that his boss and coworkers told him to quit talking about it.
Right.
And he was scheduled to have a 3rd trip down, and he canceled that. He wasn't going to be a part of it at that point. Any side stories on any of that?
Well, I used to tell that story at my U.S. surveys, my Civil War classes for years. It's such a good story. It's probably not true. This is what you learn when you work with Abraham Lincoln, and like somebody will be like, all right, we're putting together a post about Lincoln. I'm going to use this quote. I'm like, just wait a second. We got to verify it. 9 times out of 10, I'm like, it's a fabulous quote. We probably don't think he said it. So Lincoln did make 2 trips, one going downstream. And by the way, they build these rafts, flat bottom rafts, right, with an oar, and they load it full of goods, and they go down the Mississippi River. When you think about what this generation is made of, right, we're all just like, I don't think so. His dad sends him down, and you load this raft up full of goods. He's going to send it. And this was often a rub. This is another blind spot, by the way, that I was thinking about. Lincoln's relationship with his father, Thomas Lincoln, was notoriously tense. His father had rights to his earnings by law until Lincoln was 21, and Thomas Lincoln took those rights up until that he held on to that. and the two of them didn't always get along particularly well. That first trip he makes down for his father, sells the goods. It's either on that first trip, but I think it's the second one when he goes down, when now he's earning a living on his own. He builds this raft with some goods to sell. The problem with that story, which is that Lincoln sees this slave auction and he's so horrified by it that this is what really galvanizes him to oppose slavery, is that number one, he's been opposed to slavery his whole life. I mean, he was raised in that concept. His parents were fundamentally dedicated to an opposition to slavery, and he talked about it before. Number two, I think, if I remember right, he's with his cousin, Dennis, and there's no description of any of this. And so the argument is it probably didn't happen, but he would have seen enslaved men, women, and children that certainly could have solidified it. And so I've had to take it out of my lectures, even though it's a fabulous story. But you always ask the best questions. But yes, there I can give you that much.
Thank you for a great talk, Dr. Ural.
Thanks, Bradley. He has to say that. I'm on his dissertation committee.
As you know, I'm a Vicksburg guy, and I think Vicksburg, like Lincoln said, allegedly was key. After the Gettysburg
We're pretty
Address,
sure he did say that. Go ahead.
After the Gettysburg Address, very eloquent address, did Lincoln have anything similar to say about the successful execution of the Vicksburg campaign?
Oh, good question. I don't know. Do you? I'm guessing you do. Wait, I'm like, wait, is this a plant? I'm serious. I'm not testing you.
I was sincerely curious if he had any eloquent things.
No, I mean, he has a lot of eloquent things to say about Grant. And he has a lot of eloquent things to say about why it's so important for that river to be opened. He had a lot of not lovely things to say, I'm sure, when he was frustrated with Vicksburg. But no, I don't, there's this argument that these are the two biggest battles of the Civil War. These are the two most decisive battles of the Civil War. And people get into these fights over which one is more important. And I'm always like, oh, for heaven's sakes, they're both important in different ways. And I think, if we could get into his mind, what we would see him thinking about is, number one, the next step. It's never like, I'm glad that was done. It was always like, where are we going next? And number two, who's going to get us there? And the connection to Vicksburg there is definitely going to be through Grant, where he fundamentally believes that Grant is the commander he needs. Now, this leads to these assumptions and therefore he just gives Grant free rein, which he never really did. Lincoln liked to have his hand in the pot. But he fundamentally backs Grant, and he'll increasingly do so. And it's not just because of Shiloh. I mean, this isn't revelatory, I'm sure, to a lot of you here. It's very much because of Vicksburg too.
Hello, I have two questions. My first question is, if based off your studying, if Lincoln hadn't been assassinated and lived, what other accomplishments do you think he would have made? And also my second question is, also based off your studying, did you find any actual evidence that Lincoln was a vampire hunter, or is that just a fictional movie?
I'll start with the second one first. No, tragically, we have not found evidence that he was a vampire hunter. My students wanted me to watch that movie for so long, and I'm like, guys, come on. And finally, I watched it. This is just a couple of years ago with a history club at Mississippi State. And I got this, it's pretty good. I mean, it's just a good action movie if you can let it go. But no, tragically, no evidence to support that. In terms of your first question, like, what do we think Lincoln would have done? I fundamentally think he would have supported the 14th and 15th Amendments. Like, I don't think that's a bold claim. I mean, I think that's pretty fair to assume. What I can't quite navigate, what I'm not quite sure of, is what peace would have looked like to him. Because if you look at him, I don't know if many of you have read Michael Vornberg's book, Lincoln's Peace. He's going to be talking at Mississippi State this fall. It's a great book if you haven't read it. It's what did Lincoln envision for peace? And what he talks about often is this kind of wrestling term of let him up easy. He wants to put the country back together again. He's almost hoping Jefferson Davis just escapes so they don't have to potentially have a trial. He just wants peace. And what we know now is that it wasn't that easy. And so where would he have fallen as we get to 1866, 67, with more and more violence? Like, how would he have changed his mind while being I mean, he's a Republican at this time period, so he's in the camp, right, of kind of a liberal or a radical, but he's very moderate in how he goes about doing things. He's very gradual. And so that I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Yeah, good question.
Thank you. Given the first few slides where you talk about the three values,
Mhm.
virtue and all that, and I was reflecting about, as you were talking about that, about the neo-confederation of the U.S. and what it means to be a citizen in modern America, especially given the even questioning whether a citizen is a native born as a citizen and all this. What would you, given what you've read from him and all that, how would you take if he were here? How would he take all this that's going on?
And number one, I don't think he'd be surprised, right? I mean, we've been fighting over this forever. Number two, how would he approach it? It depends on where you want to grab him at what point of his life. I mean, when he's growing up, say, and as he's a very young man, let's say, let's have him in his 20s in Illinois. This was a time period where citizens and non-citizens could vote in Illinois. You didn't have to be a citizen because Illinois wanted settlers coming west. And then what they realized was a lot of those immigrants coming west were not Whigs. They were voting for the Democrats. And so the Whigs were like, well, wait a minute. It's often kind of whichever party is not getting that support. But I don't know how. I mean, I think, number one, Lincoln is the law, the law, the law. And so he would have been about enforcing the law. And often it makes me uncomfortable when I'm thinking of, okay, what would Lincoln have done in this situation? I'm not saying he's my overwhelming guide. I haven't, quite drunk the Kool-Aid yet. But I mean, seriously, when you think about how would great leaders handle these situations, I think fundamentally it would be about the law, but at the same time, he'd be frustrated maybe with, do we need to revise law? And that, are we not doing what we need to do in that camp? But I don't know, and that's as far as I'm going to go into that question as a state employee.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I know we still have a few questions left in the room. Dr. Ural is going to be around and answer some questions. He's going to be at that front left table just off the stage. And so please come speak with her, learn more about the Lincolnia artifacts that they have at Mississippi State University. Let's give her another round of applause.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
A couple of quick reminders before you go. We hope you'll come back and join us next week. We'll have B.B. Wolf and Daniel Johnson and their presentation of A Living, Breathing Legacy, continuing the Wolf Studio legacy. This is their 80th anniversary this year. And then we also want to remind you to come back tomorrow. Dr. Christina Thomas, who's been with us for a couple of History's Lunches, she is the inaugural Bob Moses Scholar here at MDAH, and she's going to give her presentation on visualizing Freedom Summer right back in this room at 3:30 tomorrow. So we'd love to see you right back at 3:30 in this room for that presentation tomorrow. One more time for Dr. Ural. Thank you, guys. You'll have a great day.